Just now, the human rights campaigner Peter Tatchell, and we're joined from Bristol by the Catholic theologian Tina Beattie. Professor Beattie, should this man be allowed to go ahead and burn the Qu'ran?
These are very difficult questions and there's no easy answer, but we do live in troubled times, and in this instance I think there is quite a strong argument for intervening to say no, he shouldn't.
OK, Peter Tatchell, what do you think?
I think people in a free society have a right to burn books, including my own, but they should exercise judgment about the possible consequences. And I think in this particular case, as we saw with the Danish cartoons, there was a real serious prospect of violence and even murder. And so in those circumstances, I would ask the pastor to restrain his right to freedom of expression.
Supposing he rejects your request?
Well, under US law and under British law, there's nothing to say that he shouldn't be able to do that. Incitement
to hatred is a crime.
Well, is he inciting hatred? I mean, I think burning a book or, something that he disagrees with is, an expression. We may find it objectionable, we may find it offensive, but I don't think it should be criminalised unless it incites violence or it commits libel, which may cause damage and harm to someone.
The key thing here, Tina Beattie, presumably, is the nature of the book. I mean, we saw Muslims on the streets of this country burning copies of the satanic verses. Why is that acceptable to you, but not burning the Qu'ran?
That's not really acceptable to me, but I don't want to start living in a regime of censorship. And we have to understand that we've lost that sense with which Muslims hold the Qu'ran sacred. The most sacred thing in a Muslim household will be the Qu'ran in Arabic. Translations don't have that status. But at times like these, when it must look very odd for us to be so fine-tuning our freedoms of expression in the West, when at the same time we do have Guantanamo Bay, we have had Abu Ghraib, it must look very odd from the distance of Afghanistan and Iraq just how meticulous we are about freedom of expression when we ride roughshods over so many other physical, real freedoms. They're difficult questions, but freedom of expression is not an end in itself. It's a means to an end.
Let's be blunt about it. We are talking about a particular community. There is no suggestion that if someone goes out and burns a copy of the Bible, it has anything like the same potential consequences, or even at a very trivial level, if you burn, Star Trek scripts, that Jedi Knights are going to get really aggressive. That's what we're really talking about here, isn't it?
I think we'd have to, the closest we would have in the Christian world would be if you burned a consecrated host. I don't think Catholics would take to the streets and call for murderous revenge, but I think in terms of violating something very sacred, we'd have to imagine something of that order.
But we're sensitive about this because of the threat of possible violence as a consequence. Isn't that right, Peter Tatchell?
Absolutely. We are being held to ransom by the threat of violence, and that is very, very regrettable. But I would say to this pastor, your actions are likely, rightly or wrongly, to provoke an extreme reaction. I'd say wrongly, but they are likely to provoke an extreme reaction. In Pakistan, there may well be attacks upon Christians, and we've already seen Christians being persecuted, even killed in Pakistan by Islamist fundamentalists.
Sure. But the difficulty then surely is that if you start going around talking to people, however boneheaded this vicar may be down in Florida, however much of an idiot he may be, if you start going around to people and saying, I ask you not to do this because there is a danger that some people will react extremely to it, don't you encourage people to threaten extreme reaction?
Yes, I accept that. That is one of the awful aspects of this whole issue. We are caught in a bind where we want to defend freedom of speech, yet we are constrained because we fear the violent reaction and consequences. Ultimately, I think we do have to recognise that if people are likely to be killed, is it really the right thing to do? Is it really the responsible thing to do? Aren't there other ways in which this pastor can express his criticism? And can't he express his criticism not as a blanket condemnation of all Muslims who do not share the extremist ideology that he condemns?
We're not dealing with a very sophisticated man here.
We are dignifying this man with far more respect than he deserves. He admits he hasn't even read the Qu'ran. It's one of the things we have to deal with, that living in an age of global communications, these people who should never have the oxygen of publicity can claim global publicity for what they're doing. And we're playing into their hands in a way, but I don't see any way round that. And I don't think we're talking about someone who's come to a responsible decision to use freedom of expression for some greater good. We are talking here not about don't do this because extremists will turn violent. We are talking about a violent extremist, actually.
Should he be stopped doing it by law?
In the times we live in, although I'm very reluctant to say yes, I think there is an argument for saying we live in an age of extremisms, and if we want to keep the freedoms we cherish most, we may have to curb people's rights to be mindlessly extremists.
And you would dignify all belief, would you, by giving it that protection?
No, but I think these arguments quickly get a bit foolish. We do have ways of discriminating in law between widely held beliefs which we may not all share, but we can see they're not
It's a question of numbers?
I think it's a question of history, tradition, communities, and ideas that have survived the test of time.
All right. Peter Thatcher, you can have a very quick last word there. Go on.
You know, I think in this particular case, a pastor representing a very small community church has taken a decision. We can't allow our freedoms to be curbed and undermined just because of his recklessness and irresponsibility. But we should, as is happening, organise people of all faiths and none to say that this kind of action is not actually defending Christian values, it's not targeting Muslim extremists. It is a generalised attack on all Muslim people, and generalised attacks on Muslims or people of any faith is fundamentally wrong.
Okay, thank you both very much indeed.